Everybody tells stories about the weird and strange. My tale tells of how my life was spared by the half-whole mask and keeps saving my life to this day. I was going one day in late December, north to my home state from California of Oregon, nothing special. I was simply traveling to pay the family a visit for the holidays while traveling north. I came across a tiny, nothing terrible, just a bunch of snowstorms. When the snow started to fall, I wasn't concerned about the slight rise in snowfall initially, given that I had snow tires set up prior to my lengthy. I did make the trip home, but I got a bit. When the snow began, I was reluctant to drive. To actually reduce the substantial quantity of snowfall combined with the big, plenty already strewn on the floor as I journeyed deeper into the mountains, made me think about locating a location to remain for that I thought I could sleep at night. As the storm moves past that, the ability to provide my car's heating with a shatter before it chooses to explode into fire or worse, simply quit working. Overall, I looked at as much of that as I could, but there weren't any structures nearby that are the only another choice I had for my. The dilemma was to continue driving and hold out hope. There was a town or highway close by where I would do in order to get away from the I must have been driving for a storm at. It took me at least an hour to notice a sign up ahead showing the distance to the nearest. The city was. I felt a little sad when I read 162. When it passed my windshield for miles and disappeared into the wintry evening at this a point where the snow was slapping against my window. And I was aware that I wasn't not just going to take 162 minutes, but 162 Ms. radio's digital clock read 21 AM, and I determined that the following turn off, I decided to take a chance that I could locate a community that will yield some outcomes on my present attempt. My reasoning was either remain the same or freeze to death in my automobile. Night at the home of an unknown individual, I mentally weighed the two possibilities, chose the only option a rational person would choose and accompany the house. Another half hour passed, and still unable to locate a location to pull off. As I was beginning to lose, I'm hoping I'd pip a turn off in the distant. A tiny figure began to approach. Toward my headlights, and beyond examination, I discovered that were two poles made of wood that was a member of a fence. As I entered the road, the ground between the two wooden poles felt rough and rocky beneath me. As I didn't drive, I was just driving on gravel. Too long before I began to notice a tiny cabin intrudes into my line of sight. The cabin's lights were off, but the location appeared to be in decent condition. Parked my vehicle beneath a tall, ominous, the tree that lived on the cabin's front yard. Exiting my vehicle, I grabbed my additional jacket right away and I pulled the half-whole mask on, wore over my ears and around my neck. In order to maintain the warmth near my face, I put on a cap and walked slowly up to the cabin after tightening my helmet over my head. As I went up through the chilly, windy night to what I believed to be my deliverance, regretted not receiving any right away. Gloves to protect my hands in spite of I was irritated with my face and hands, and the remainder of my body was at ease, warm, thus I had limited space to I gripped my freezing hands tightly and complained into my pockets and carried on with my trip. I walked over the cabin's lawn. I saw something strange near the door. No sign of life could be found anywhere. Not even a car was in the front yard. Removing the right hand from I wrapped on my pocket 3 times while waiting patiently before greeting someone. I apologize for disturbing you at such a late hour at night, but I require lodging for some hours. No one responded to my request for assistance. I therefore rapped 3 more times on the door, striking my knuckles more forcefully against the old wood of the greetings at the entryway. I repeated a little louder before going on to say I'm here to steal from you or anything. I need a location to spend the remainder of the I swear I'll be gone by sunrise this evening. When I was done speaking, I touched the very ornate metal door handle that appeared. The door was unlocked. Declared loudly, I'm coming in now. Please let me know if there is someone inside. I pressed the metal lever immediately. Please. Down, feeling a little strange that the door was unlocked, and the door was opened using minimal opposition on the opposite end, putting an end to it with roughly the same opposition, even though the door appeared quite ancient. After examining I saw that there were 5 rooms in the cabin. The largest was the living room, space, a tiny kitchen, and an even smaller restroom, as well as what I thought were two tiny, dark bedrooms in the back, were in the comfortable cabin, making it would be nearly black if my eyes weren't adused to the dimness from outside. I determined the best course of action would be looking for a light switch. In order to, I grabbed my phone and switched it on. Using a flashlight app, I can scan the walls. Yielded no outcomes, but at the danger of the valuable battery dying my phone, I determined that the ideal choice would be to switch the light off and place my before turning. Put your phone in airplane mode. I inspected the artwork without my light. Dangling from the wall I covered with gloss. In the first, examine every painting that came into my vistas were merely ordinary landscapes or harbors, such things. There was artwork that resembled a fox hunt or anything similar, but other from that, it was just your average artwork. Observe adorning the walls in the house of an elderly individual. There was a painting, but that attracted my attention. Notice that the painting was little and included what appeared to be two adults. A teenage girl, a mother and father, and a tiny kid. The family had in that painting were dressed in what appeared to the Victorian-era clothing. I'm only speculating about the clothing, meaning they might have come from the early 20th century or the 1800s. The main idea is that the attire was extremely there was something regal and elaborate. Quite unsettling regarding the picture in the painting through each member's face of the household appeared to be smoothed with clay. It's rather difficult to explain, but the three family members appeared to lack facial features. I mean features, but not face features. Rather than the typical facial features together, you and I have the three individuals in there were smooth skin grooves in the artwork, where you often have a nose or eyes. The sole individual in the artwork is mouth. That didn't have an expressionless face was the adolescent girl with a typical facial characteristics for an adolescent female. Actually was pretty amazing. I drew myself away from the painting in order to look at my phone for the duration that my phone showed. The fact that it was past 2 in the morning meant that I made the decision to enter the rear room and verified was occupied. To room was thief the mother and sheep. The resum, the Lee room was empty save from an elaborate dresser, medium-sized bed, and there wasn't much to go by on the nightstand. In addition to being more cheesy, the walls were blank, paintings to provide a bit more depth, atmosphere. Even though there wasn't sign of a heating system in addition to a chimney, the spaces were tolerable, because I thought I could simply wrap myself in my garments behind the blankets, so I was merely going to be there to stay warm. Nonetheless, for a few hours, so there wasn't much use in lighting a fire. In addition to the cabin's owners would not be returning tonight, given the late hour. I jumped into the shabby bed and faced. The door adjacent to another door is open, and I thought it was a closet and took my half, fully covering my face with a whole mask to ensure that my head would remain comfortable and warmth for the remainder of my visit. I lowered the cloth of my mask a little, the 4:30 a.m. alarm on my phone, and returned it to the bedside table. I bundled up and covered my face once more, tightly, my eyes closed behind the blankets, and allowing dreamland to transport me until, after what seemed like minutes, I woke up. Afterward, to the sound of I froze, scraping. As I heard the loud noise that keeps coming softly, I struggled to unwind from the locked door. By believing that all the noise was I heard, it was simply a rat or something. Another creature that was staying overnight in the closet as the owners of the cabin were gone in silence. I turned over on my back, lowering my half-whole mask a little thus. A tiny slit emerged, providing me with a tiny window to what was outside. I was as rigid as a board when I lay on the bed, with my face hidden by my mask and cap, in a manner that resembled a visor, allowing me a brief glimpse of what was in. Fortunately, the darkness didn't harm my eyes, remained adapted to the darkness, which provided me with a tiny bit of assurance as I kept searching in the direction of There was a scratching sound emanating from the scratching got louder and lasted longer. For what felt like minutes before, simply like that, it abruptly stopped, ceased, and the room fell silent once more. However, the method of silence wasn't safe. The room's oppressive silence was a dreadful, menacing kind of reduced the amount of noise in the atmosphere, was the kind of quiet that occurs in a film right before something unexpected, at you just when I was starting to relax down the closet door. Knob started to. My heart was jiggling and turning extremely slowly, rushing from my chest when I noticed and heard the turn of that knob, and each portion of my body was itching to get out of bed, and leaving the cabin before anything was on the opposite side of that door and received out after me. I lay motionless on the bed even though I was suffering from a mixture of nerves that produce adrenaline, and my gut tells me to go immediately. Of my eyes grew wide as I saw the door to the cupboard partially opened, and I noticed what appeared to be a desiccated head fastened to a lengthy neck emerges from the aperture. Then a skeletal body, the thing that was appearing, crawled on anything that came out of the closet, crawled out of the doorway and made a slow on my way to the bed where I was sleeping. Was more terrified than ever in the entirety of life as the object rose, nearly nearing the cabin's roof. I peered down in which direction did the monster stand. I was being observed as I emerged through the thin slit in my mask, spinning with absolute terror in my thoughts as I looked up at the body of the animal, observing the animal's skeletal face. It had no eyes in its eyes, as I could see. Sockets that make me think that I could see them, but they couldn't see me. Just when the notion that it isn't able to observe me began to offer me at the creature, little comfort started to talk unusual. The monster murmured as it kept observing me before starting to talk once more. It is not afraid of, the creature kept saying in awe, me, a tone as its noisy breathing started, still staring at me and holding on to lying on my bed's edge. Sensing the Bonnie's hand touches the edge of my bed made my mind enter a total panic mode, which is the sole thing that prevented me from leaping to my feet was the believed that perhaps the creature I wouldn't attack since I was either dead or asleep. How is it possible for it to be fearless? I tightened my teeth and said the thing, before gasping out and abruptly withdrawing while keeping its mouth wide in an expression that gave the impression of terror. The monster spoke to itself without a face. It kept retreating. It has no face. The animal repeated, but this time louder than previously and a little bit more. The creature is faceless and menacing, yelled as it moved farther away. I heard the monster breathe from the bed, loudly and rapidly before becoming quiet, and gradually making their way back to the side of the thing slowly leans over me in bed, kept staring at me before gently breathing on my face for the first time. I can still smell its bad breath through my conceal the strong odor that it, despite my best efforts, I did not gag. In response to the terrible smell in my head, I made the decision to remain still and avoid saying or doing anything that could compromise whatever delusion I was supplying the item that was presently. The monster breath breed was examining me. On me once more gently, the stink I detected, its breath could only be explained by as unadulterated death, which just made my mind decide to remain flawless. Still oddly, it whispered to me once again, leaning close to me and getting right to the point where I could smell and see that it was rotting. The thing gradually grasped for my flesh. Its hand is slowly approaching my face. Every inch that the rotting hand moved. I couldn't suppress my things becoming worse and worse, believed that this was the end of it for me. Tonight, the beast would either kill me or steal, take me away, torment me, then murder me, and nobody would be aware of what had happened to me. My body would be discovered out here, and no one would be aware of my narrative. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes as I considered all of the people I never enjoyed having me ripped away in for a single moment. There is no face. The creature's hands hummed gently. Approached my face more closely, I could hear the creature's voice filled with agony, while it kept shouting repeatedly as the creature's hand reached for me. The long, bony hand hardly moved a few centimeters. I prepared myself to move away from my face, for the final ideas I had were the worst, would never have regarding the individuals that I loved as I believed my life to be. Suddenly, a loud sound came from the space occupying the ear nearest, the bedside table, with a barrage of beeps, and making the beast leap and scream, back as the thing continued to make sounds. Hurled itself against the wall again, uncontrollably screaming in terror as it staggered back in the direction of the closet. I was momentarily stunned. Prior to I got the idea that I had established my 4 through 30 a.m., which had to be where the noise came from, that I jumped out of the bed, pointing and snatching my phone, the monster on the illuminated screen as the alarm kept ringing loudly. The creature was startled by the loud ringing, shout in terror and bewilderment even more, as it moved away more quickly as I got closer. Seeing my opportunity, I turned on my phone's a flashlight, then switched it to strobe mode. To further confuse the creature, "No, the thing has no face, no face," screamed at me while retreating to the security of the closet. I kept on illuminate the monster with my light, and for effect, I turned up the volume. Music while I kept sticking my phone in the lion-like direction of the monster. The creature flung itself into the I revealed the closet's shadowy corners. I slammed the door and locked it again. The screams emanating from the creature began to become weaker and less intense, as if it were retreating farther. Entering the house without a face, "It has no face," I heard the beast scream. As it continued to go more and farther, after listening to the final retreating statements made by the entity that frightened me, I ran out of the cottage all night, crashing into my car at high speed, and I was flowed off the gravel road, trembling all over while I was driving, and when I dragged my half-whole mask deeper into the skin that was exposed was as white as snow. It was all over the floor. I was so terrified by the entire situation as I arrived at the first settlement, I parked my car and started crying uncontrollably for some time, as what I had recently gone through would leave me permanently scarred. But as I sobbed in my vehicle at a 7-Eleven parking lot, couldn't resist laughing a little. Occasionally, in between sobbing attacks, I survived my situation with little to no. I have a scrape on my body in addition to the mental wounds. I was okay. I was still alive, and I no longer needed to worry after I've done my entire crying episode. And giggling uncontrollably, I wiped and sniffed my way into the store. Taking the remainder of I started crying as I made my way into the store. The clerk glanced at me and followed my guidance with his eyes prior to carrying on with his actions. The store was largely deserted save for I was the sole customer, an older couple. I had a difficult night, the cashier said, keeping one eyebrow raised as he scanned my things. "You don't know I was gazing at during the winter day. I looked out the window, saw that you appeared quite agitated when you arrived. What transpired, and were you dumped, or anything?" as he gazed up at me. The amount I owed was calculated by the register. He was seeing the youth behind the register. He appeared to be somewhat less mature than I was, but it doesn't speak a lot since, despite my age of 22, I appear younger than I actually am. I checked the cashier's name badge for age, briefly before realizing that I had. There is nothing to lose by informing him of that I only had his little name on my that night. Ivan's ID tag was Reed, and as I was done relating my terrifying story to him, something strange occurred as I had anticipated. Laugh out loud or declare that I was the greatest liar he had ever spoken with rather than. Ivan simply stood there without doing any of that. As he gazed at me, his skin turned white. His face was so shocked that he gave me the sensation he had just seen a person is struck by a train. Or "Ivan, are you okay?" I murmured, seeing his gaze as they both stood there. "What? It's just Evan," quiet abuse started to say before his mind faltered. Off because of the fresh sensation that we were being observed, I started to sense eyes burn into my head's back prior to looking back to see the elderly couple I looked as soon as I walked into the business. Previously, the elderly couple had the Evan's terrified expression was only they must have heard the sound a few seconds ago. Entire narrative after a brief period of silence, that an elderly couple inquired about my knowledge of the cabin, which I was unable to say. I described them as best I could. Based on what I observed, the pair went on to tell me how long the cabin is. Visited and discovered that it was haunted by a presence so frightening that the location was declared guilty and allowed to decay after. So many people vanished there that they claimed to me that nobody who ever remained. Has anyone ever seen that cabin alive? Once more, if they have ever been spotted. Following their visit, one of my closest pals remained in that cabin at night. Evans murmured softly when gazing into the distant. Although I declined to continue his thoughts with enter the cabin, I had a horrible feeling would occur if we went. I really tried to persuade him of the foolishness of the dare and to stay out, but he wouldn't be designated as a chicken and proceeded with Evan. The dare started to cry as he went on with his tale, which I never saw. After that night, I kept him again, phoning his residence, but his parents still couldn't locate him, so we distributed flyers and billboards, but we were never successful. A few days later, we called the police, and I informed them of the cabin. Evan started to stifle his sobs as they discovered him with his fist clenched. That cabin's basement was splayed out. His eyes were surgically removed from the floor, extracted from the sockets of his eyes. His lips were extracted, and his nose was. When they discovered him, they cut them off. Was nude and had a cut from his pelvis to the base of his rib cage, all of the way down the center of his body. His internal organs were removed. Body. And to make matters worse, his genitals were cut off completely, but you are curious about the worst aspect of it all. Upon conducting an autopsy, the police body, they discovered he was still alive during the entire procedure. Evan flinched when he recalled the entire horrifying scene and declared that they never discovered who or what was responsible. There was no DNA evidence to find someone guilty, unable to locate the instruments that created the incisions, and they failed to discover. Evan tightened his fist at anything. In front of the elderly man on the table, as he listened to our discourse, he putting a hand on Ivan's shoulder to comfort him, that everything would be okay, as he reassured Evan, who turned to face me and stated individuals have been vanishing from that region for decades or perhaps millennia. Regardless of what we know, the bodies always finish in the same gory manner. I don't give a damn. Nobody deserves anything because of who you are, such as that occurring to them. They ought to simply burn that wicked location to the ground. The elderly woman joined her husband's sideways and gave me the greatest, ominous face I've ever. If your story is accurate, you ought to. You're the luckiest man on the planet. The Earth's surface throughout all of my years of, you are the only one who may enter the living, that cabin, and bring the woman out alive, remarked while holding her husband's hand. Firmly as she addressed me, after listening to I understood from the elderly woman's statements that Ivan claimed that his friend's body was discovered in the basement, which clarifies the reason as the voice of the monster grew softer. I was dragged into the basement since my phone hadn't died. I promptly paid for my things and departed the shop with more distressed than I was upon entering, feeling sleepy as a result of not getting enough sleep, and an ongoing rush of adrenaline brought on by my entire awful experience. I chose to go to a motel and sleep for the day, and unwinding to clear my head, I sat on the bed that night in my motel room and examined the two objects that I clutched in one hand to save my life. Onto my face, hiding half-whole mask from that awful monster, I held my cell in my other hand. Phone that frightened the creature that might have killed me, determined that, going forward, I would to bed it. I always wear my half-whole mask. The least I could have done was to save my life. Because of my recent encounter with death, I had learned from recent experience that life is too valuable to be wasted. Thus I made the decision to invite Samantha, my dearest friend, to a date, and everything went smoothly. Samantha and I were together very fine for 2 years prior to my current arrival. Requested her hand in marriage, and yes, a piece of me will always remember that terrible evening, and as a result of it I've only been sporting my half-whole mask to bed each night ever then, although additionally, I've prioritized not living in any kind of home with as an extra precaution. Basement, I began locking all of the doors before leaving. It's difficult to go to bed, but you can never be as well. Cautious in spite of this insane prec, Samantha has agreed to my small warnings, peculiarities, and has remained encouraging as we proceed or travel together. I couldn't be through life more satisfied with the outcome in my life, and I'm really fortunate to have Samantha. Everything is wonderful. Only one issue that I find bothersome, and I believe I might have to put the blame on my fantasy. But occasionally when I awaken in the evening, when it's actually peaceful, but occasionally I hear soft, scraping sounds as well, and I believe it's simply paranoid, but I swear that occasionally I hear a whisper coming from a faceless within my closet.